Did a single exhausted cow, kicking over a kerosene lamp in a barn, truly inaugurate the most profound, devastating, and ultimately generative catastrophe in 19th century America? The official, almost folkloric narrative of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, a tale enshrined by hasty Victorian journalists and perpetuated by the city's eager desire for a simple scapegoat, centers on Mrs. Catherine O'Leary and her infamous bovine. This enduring, surprisingly quaint myth is one of American history's most profound deceptions. For the true story of the fire is not one of a simple accident in a humble barn, but the inevitable roaring climax of a city built on breathtaking arrogance, staggering corruption, and an almost psychotic denial of its own flammable foundation. The fire, which consumed the beating heart of the nation's interior, was not an act of God or a kick of a hoof. It was an architectural and political suicide that gave birth to the modern age. To understand the inferno, one must first appreciate the tinderbox that was Chicago circa 1871. This was no ancient, stone-girded European metropolis. It was a screaming, ambitious, mushroom cloud of a city, less than 40 years removed from a frontier outpost. Chicago was the quintessential American boomtown, a place where fortunes were made faster than the blink of an eye, and where the rule of law was frequently superseded by the law of the deal. Its population had exploded from barely 30,000 in 1850 to nearly 300,000, and this monstrous growth was fueled by two essential, highly combustible commodities: wood and greed. The vast majority of the city, especially the crucial commercial districts north of the river, was constructed of pine, Chicago pine, cheap and readily available from the relentless lumber mills of Wisconsin and Michigan. Even the sidewalks were planks of wood. Streets were paved with wooden blocks. Roofs were shingled with tarred wood. The city was, in effect, a massive pressurized kiln waiting for a match. Its foundational architecture was a crime against common sense, yet the booming prosperity and the ruthless pace of commerce masked this inherent vulnerability. Insurance companies charged laughably low rates, convinced by the city's self-important boosterism that its modern fire department could handle anything. Beneath the physical tinderbox lay a political and social landscape just as volatile. The city was run by a succession of machine politicians and ward bosses who oversaw a system riddled with patronage and graft. Inspection standards were non-existent or easily bought. The fire department, while boasting some modern steam engines, was chronically understaffed, overworked, and critically, its resources were improperly allocated and maintained. Just the year before, a massive fire had warned the populace, yet no substantive reforms were enacted. The quick money mentality of the Gilded Age deemed caution an impediment to progress. The summer and early autumn of 1871 had been extraordinarily dry, a drought that baked the wooden city, turning every street, every building, and every wooden sidewalk into kindling with the explosive potential of gunpowder. The night of Sunday, October 8th began innocently enough, but whether the spark was Mrs. O'Leary's cow, a neighbor named Daniel Sullivan seen fleeing the scene, or, as some modern historians now speculate, a small group of gamblers whose clandestine meeting went wrong, the point of origin near DeKoven Street was less significant than the material surrounding it. By the time the blaze was first noticed, the dry air, the fierce winds whipping off Lake Michigan, and the tight wooden construction ensured its immediate transformation into a raging, self-perpetuating entity. Crucially, a watchman's mistake in alerting the wrong firehouse, compounded by exhausted firefighters returning from battling a major blaze the night before, cost the city the precious first hour that might have contained the tragedy. The fire did not merely burn, it created its own weather system. The superheated air rushed upward,
creating a cyclonic wind that sucked in oxygen and hurled giant flaming embers across the narrow Chicago River and over vast tracts of the city. The fire jumped an entire city block at a time. It became so hot that materials normally considered non-combustible failed catastrophically. Iron melted and twisted into grotesque modern sculptures. Stone, including limestone and granite, cracked, spalled, and pulverized under the thermal shock, collapsing into dust. Even the Chicago River, covered with oil, timber, and debris from the lumber yards and shipping docks, briefly appeared to burn, its surface a shifting mirror of hellish orange and black. For 48 terrifying hours, from Sunday night until Tuesday morning, the city of Chicago was a living, screaming furnace. The destruction defied comprehension. Over 2,100 acres were incinerated, a 4-mile-long swath that included the entire central business district, all the main hotels, newspapers, banks, and nearly 18,000 buildings. The loss was estimated at $200 million, a catastrophic sum for the time. Officially, around 300 people died, though the true toll was likely far higher, as countless bodies were reduced to ash in the intense heat. Tens of thousands were instantly homeless, forced to flee across the prairie to the west or onto the desolate, smoke-choked beaches of Lake Michigan, watching their entire world vanish. The silence that followed was as shocking as the roar. For days, martial law was imposed, not merely to prevent looting, but to organize the overwhelming relief effort for the 100,000 people now sleeping under the sky. And yet, amid the smoldering ruins and the stench of burnt wood and human despair, a truly astonishing, quintessentially American phenomenon began to stir: the absolute refusal to surrender. Within weeks, not months of the catastrophe, the rebuilding began. It was a chaotic, feverish, and intensely competitive process, unlike any municipal recovery in history. The fire had done more than destroy. It had wiped the slate clean of decades of shoddy, provincial, and dangerous construction, presenting architects, engineers, and financiers with the largest urban planning and construction laboratory the world had ever seen. The spirit of the rebuilding was defined by a single, powerful mantra: make no little plans. This mantra would come to define the career of Daniel Hudson Burnham, a young, ambitious architect who, along with his partner John Root, immediately recognized the opportunity. Burnham was the quintessential pragmatist, a man of staggering organizational skill and unyielding ambition. He was the force who believed that architecture was not just about art, but about making money and creating a powerful, enduring statement about American capability. His vision was vast, commercial, and focused on maximum utility, the efficient, profitable building.
But there was another, deeper force at work: the artistic and philosophical mind of Louis Sullivan. Sullivan, a young man profoundly influenced by the aesthetic theories of Emerson and Whitman, saw the fire as a purification. He sought to create an American architecture, one free from the stifling European traditions of classicism and historical ornamentation. His philosophy, most famously encapsulated by the phrase "form ever follows function," was a radical declaration of independence. For Sullivan, the new Chicago architecture had to express the height, the lightness, the speed, and the commercial purpose of the modern democratic city. The clash and cooperation between these two schools, the practical commerce of Burnham and the radical philosophy of Sullivan, forged the architectural character of modern America. The key to the new Chicago was not merely brick and mortar, but steel. The fire had decisively proven that stone, while beautiful, was a structural liability in a major conflagration,
exploding under intense heat. The solution was a revolution in structural engineering, the invention and rapid deployment of the steel skeleton frame, the true birth of the skyscraper. While the first true steel-framed building, the Home Insurance Building, was technically completed by William LeBaron Jenney in 1885, the engineering and financial impetus for this shift originated immediately after the Great Fire. The realization that heavy masonry walls were structurally unnecessary, that an internal skeleton of iron-proofed iron and steel could bear the load, allowed buildings to rise to unprecedented, dizzying heights. This was not just an engineering feat, it was an economic one. Land in the Central Loop area, now completely razed, instantly became some of the most expensive real estate in the world. To maximize profitability, vertical building was the only answer. Within 10 years of the fire, Chicago had replaced its wooden frontier town identity with a canyon-like cityscape of massive, pioneering structures. Burnham and Root and their contemporaries seized this moment, constructing towering commercial palaces like the Rookery Building, with its revolutionary metal and glass light court, and the Masonic Temple, briefly the tallest building in the world. These structures were monuments to commercial power, driven by the relentless, organized efficiency that Daniel Burnham championed. They were often Romanesque or neoclassical in style, reflecting Burnham's desire for permanence and established grandeur. But it was Sullivan, working with his partner Dankmar Adler, who gave the skyscraper its soul. Buildings like the Auditorium Building, 1889, and later the brilliant Carson Pirie Scott Store, 1899, embodied the function-driven philosophy. Sullivan believed that the tall office building was a proud and soaring thing and should be treated as a unified artistic expression. He emphasized the vertical lines, the repetitive windows expressing the internal office units, and the elaborate organic terracotta ornamentation at the base and entrance, which served as a human-scale counterpoint to the towering steel frame. The Chicago School of Architecture, defined by these giants, created a new vocabulary of construction that was simultaneously practical, profitable, and breathtakingly modern. The city's comeback was a staggering testament to American audacity. Just 22 years after the fire, Chicago hosted the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, the ultimate declaration of its rebirth. It was Daniel Burnham who spearheaded the design, creating the massive, dazzling white city of neoclassicist plaster buildings along the lakefront, while architecturally a temporary rejection of the modern Chicago school. The White City was largely classicist, which Sullivan despised. The exposition served its purpose. It showed a city not defeated by fire, but reborn as a capital of commerce, architecture, and American innovation. The Great Fire, therefore, was not merely a disaster. It was the essential purifying crucible that forged the modern built environment. It forced a paradigm shift from load-bearing masonry to steel frame construction. It launched the careers of the most influential architects in American history. It defined the Gilded Age's ruthless capacity for destruction and, more surprisingly, its even greater capacity for immediate, colossal resurrection. The myth of Mrs. O'Leary's cow may offer a simple, digestible narrative, but the profound truth is far more astonishing. The fire was a self-inflicted wound born of political negligence and architectural hubris, and the subsequent rebuilding turned a prairie boomtown into the laboratory of the American century, etching its story of devastating ambition into the steel and stone of every major city that followed. The modern skyline, from New York to Shanghai,